the urban legend that locals swear is real and won't talk about at night. In the hollowed hills of northern West Virginia, where the trees grow thick and the valleys swallow sound like secrets never meant to be spoken, there's a stretch of road locals avoid after sundown. Not because it's dangerous in the usual way, no sharp curves, no history of accidents, but because something walks there, something that doesn't belong. The road is called Hollow Creek Lane, winding through the unincorporated township of Gormley Mills, a place so small it doesn't appear on most maps, and so quiet that even birds seem reluctant to sing past twilight. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from and what time is it there? It was late autumn in the year 1987 when the first official report came in, not to the sheriff's office, but whispered between neighbors over cracked porcelain cups of black coffee. A woman by the name of Thalia Mercer, who lived alone in a weather-worn clapboard house just off Hollow Creek Lane, claimed she saw a figure standing at the edge of her cornfield one evening. She said it wasn't tall, not exactly, but wrong its limbs too long, its head tilted at an angle that made her stomach twist. It didn't move, didn't blink. Just stood there, facing her porch, as if waiting for an invitation she had no intention of giving. Thalia was known in Gormley Mills as a practical woman church every Sunday, grew her own vegetables, kept a loaded 38 inches her nightstand since her husband passed in '69. So when she called Sheriff Harlan Voss 3 nights later, voice trembling like a plucked wire, he listened. He arrived with his flashlight cutting through the fog, boots crunching on frost-laced gravel. The house was dark except for a single lamp glowing behind the kitchen curtain. Thalia met him at the door, wrapped in a faded quilt, eyes wide and bloodshot. "It's back," she whispered. "Same spot, in the field." They walked together toward the edge of the property, the beam of the flashlight slicing through the mist. Nothing moved, no footprints in the damp soil, no snapped branches or disturbed earth. Just silence, thick and heavy, like wool pressed against the ears. Then, from somewhere deep in the corn rows, a sound. A low, wet clicking, like stones being rolled in oil. Sheriff Voss aimed the light, the stalks swayed slightly, though there was no wind, and then nothing. The sound stopped. The air stilled. They stood there for nearly 10 minutes, neither speaking, both feeling watched. Sheriff Voss told Thalia to stay indoors, lock the doors, and call him if anything changed. He drove away slowly, scanning the rearview mirror until the house disappeared behind the trees. He filed a report the next morning, possible hallucination due to stress or sleep deprivation, but privately he marked a note in his personal ledger, Hollow Creek, November 3rd, Thalia Mercer. Heard something, felt something, can't explain. That winter was harsh, long stretches of snow, power outages, roads blocked for days. But people in Gormley Mills noticed other things too. Dogs refused to go into backyards after dark. Chickens vanished without signs of struggle. And on still nights, when the moon hung low and yellow, some swore they heard voices calling from the woods, voices that didn't sound human. Children were kept inside after 6, porch lights stayed on all night. Conversations about Hollow Creek Lane ended quickly, often with a shake of the head and a muttered phrase, "Best not talk about it." Then, in early spring of 1988, a teenager named Corwin Bellwether went missing. He was 16, lanky, with a stutter he'd been trying to overcome since childhood. Corwin liked to walk at night, said it helped him think. His mother, Elspeth, would beg him not to go down Hollow Creek Lane, but he always shrugged and said, "Nothing out there but trees and dirt." On the night of March 14th, he left after dinner with a notebook in his pocket, claiming he was writing poetry for school. He never came back. Search parties combed the woods for weeks. Bloodhounds picked up his scent near the creek bed, then lost it abruptly, as if he'd stepped off the face of the earth. A week later, his boots were found placed neatly side by side at the base of an old sycamore, roots tangled like knuckles. No body, no blood, no explanation. The official cause of disappearance? Presumed runaway. But in Gormley Mills, folks knew better. They looked at each other in church pews, eyes shadowed, lips tight. They didn't say much. But they stopped walking that road entirely. Years passed, the story faded mostly. New families moved into the valley, drawn by cheap land and quiet living. They laughed at the old tales. Ghosts, they'd say. Come on. But then, little things started happening. Lights flickering in empty rooms, cold spots in hallways. One woman, Miriam Huxley, claimed she saw a figure in her bathroom mirror one night, a man with sunken eyes and a mouth sewn shut with black thread. She screamed, turned on the light, and it was gone. The next morning, she found a single muddy footprint on the linoleum leading from the bathtub to the door, but the windows were locked. The house had no basement access. In 2005, a documentary crew from Pittsburgh arrived, determined to debunk the myth. They set up cameras along Hollow Creek Lane, motion sensors, audio recorders. For 2 nights, nothing. On the third, at precisely 2:13 in the morning, every device failed simultaneously. The footage showed only static, but audio captured a whisper, faint at first, then clearer. You're not supposed to see. When the lead technician reviewed the files, he noticed something else. In the background, beneath the static, a rhythmic tapping 3 slow knocks, pause, then 2 quick ones, like a code or a warning. He played it for an elderly resident named Otis Grindle, who'd lived in Gormley Mills his entire life. Otis listened once, turned pale, and said, "That's how they used to signal before the mine collapsed in '49. Only the men trapped underground knew that pattern." He refused to speak another word on the subject. By 2012, Hollow Creek Lane was officially closed. The county put up a rusted gate, chained and padlocked, with a sign that read, "Road closed, no trespassing." But kids still dared each other to go. Teens from nearby towns would drive up on weekends, flashlights in hand, laughing nervously as they approached the gate. Most turned back before reaching the tree line. But a few went further. One such group, in October of 2017, included a boy named Jory Linthwaite. He was 17, curious, raised on horror films and internet creepypastas. He didn't believe in ghosts, he believed in adrenaline. That night, he and 3 friends cut the chain with bolt cutters and slipped through. They brought cameras, a Ouija board, even a EVP recorder. They set up camp near the old sycamore where Corwin's boots were found. At first, it was jokes. Flashlight beams dancing through the trees, mocking whispers. Then, around 1 o'clock, the temperature dropped sharply. Breath came out in thick clouds. Their phones died, one by one. Then the recorder picked up a voice, clear, childlike, but distorted. "Don't look behind you." All 4 spun around. Nothing there. But when they turned back, the Ouija board planchette had moved on its own, spelling "Leave now." They packed up fast. As they ran toward the gate, Jory tripped. His friends thought he'd caught his foot on a root, but when they stopped and turned, Jory wasn't getting up. He was staring into the trees, mouth open, eyes wide with terror. "It's watching," he whispered. "It's smiling." They pulled him up, half dragging him the rest of the way. The chain was intact again, no sign it had ever been cut. Jory didn't speak for 3 days. When he finally did, he described a face pale, stretched, with too many teeth. He said it stood between the trees, perfectly still, just smiling. And then, in a voice not his own, he said, "It knows my name." After that, the county welded the gate shut, installed surveillance cameras. Within a week, all 4 cameras malfunctioned. Footage showed nothing but snow, even though the night was clear. And in the corner of one frame, barely visible, a shadow tall, thin, with fingers too long to be real, reached slowly toward the lens. To this day, residents of Gormley Mills won't go near Hollow Creek Lane after dark. If you ask them why, they'll change the subject, or give you a look one that says, "You don't want to know." But if you visit in late autumn, when the leaves turn brittle and the wind carries the scent of damp earth and decay, stand at the edge of that road at dusk. Listen, really listen. You might hear the faintest echo of footsteps, slow, deliberate, coming from nowhere and everywhere at once. You might feel the air thicken, your breath shorten, your skin prickle as if unseen eyes have settled on you. And if you're foolish enough to step past the gate, to walk just a few yards down that cracked asphalt path, you may notice something worse. The silence isn't empty. It's waiting. And sometimes, on the coldest nights, when the moon hides behind clouds and the world holds its breath, you can hear it breathe back. They say it mimics voices, calls out names in familiar tones, your mother's lullaby, your best friend's laugh, just to lure you deeper. But those who've heard it warn, don't answer, don't turn. Don't even think about looking back. Because once it has your attention, it never lets go. There's a reason the elders in Gormley Mills whisper prayers before bedtime, why parents check their children's windows twice, why on certain nights the entire town seems to go dark at once, as if hiding. It's not superstition, it's survival. And if you find yourself near Hollow Creek Lane when the clock strikes midnight, remember this. The stories aren't legends. They're warnings. And the thing in the woods? It remembers every person who didn't listen. Even now, in the hush between heartbeats, in the space where shadows grow longer than they should, something stirs. Not far, not loud, but close enough to hear you breathe. So tell me again, where are you listening from? And more importantly, are you alone? The robber who never touched the floor and never got caught. In the winter of 1987, when snow fell like whispers over the city of Pittsburgh and street lamps flickered beneath a sky heavy with clouds, a man named Thaddeus Vale moved through the shadows with a silence so complete it defied belief. He wasn't tall, nor was he broad, just 5'9", wiry with fingers long enough to dance across piano keys or slip between window frames without a sound. His eyes, a pale gray like thawing ice, missed nothing. And though he stole from banks, jewelry stores, and even the homes of the wealthy in Shadyside and Fox Chapel, no one ever saw him run, no one ever heard his footsteps, and not a single footprint was ever found leading away from the scene. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from, and what time is it there? It started on a night thick with fog, the kind that clung to coat collars and muffled the distant wail of trains along the Monongahela River. The date was December 18th, just 3 days before Christmas. The First National Trust on Fifth Avenue had closed at 5, its vault sealed, alarms armed, security guards patrolling in pairs. Yet, by 2:10 in the morning, someone had bypassed every system without tripping a wire, without leaving fingerprints, without setting off motion detectors calibrated to sense the flutter of a moth's wing. What they found the next morning chilled the blood of the manager, a man named Harlan Wexford, who arrived at 6:30 sharp with coffee steaming in a paper cup. The front door was locked. The glass unbroken, the alarm panel glowed green, fully operational. But inside, the vault stood open, its steel door yawning wide like a slack jaw. $200,000 in cash, mostly 20s and 50s, bundled in rubber bands, was gone. Also missing, a collection of rare gold coins, appraised at over $400,000, belonging to a reclusive collector from Sewickley. And yet, there were no signs of forced entry, no scuff marks on the floor, no grease on the keypad, nothing. Only one thing puzzled the investigators more than the theft itself, the surveillance footage. On the tape, recorded from a camera mounted high in the corner of the lobby, there was no intruder, just darkness. Static. Then, at exactly 2:12 a.m., a flicker, a distortion, like heat rising from asphalt. For 3 seconds, the image warped. When it cleared, the vault door was slightly ajar. But no figure appeared, no hand reached in, no shadow passed. It was as if the money had simply decided to leave on its own. By midweek, newspapers across Pennsylvania carried the headline, "Phantom Thief Strikes Pittsburgh." Radio stations played eerie synth music behind breathless reports. Police Chief Lyle Mancini held a press conference, his voice tight with frustration, insisting that no man can walk through walls and vowing that the perpetrator would be caught. But deep down, even he felt a chill he couldn't explain. Because this wasn't the first time. 3 months earlier, in September of 1987, the Regal Jewelers on Walnut Street had been hit under nearly identical circumstances. Surveillance showed nothing. Alarms never sounded. The safe opened as if by magic. A string of black pearls, once worn by a silent film star, vanished without a trace. And again, no footprints. No fingerprints. No scent for K9 units to follow. Then, in November, it happened at the Carnegie Savings and Loan in Mount Lebanon. This time, a motion sensor near the back office did register something, but only for half a second. The reading? A weightless disturbance, like air shifting in a vacuum. Investigators dismissed it as equipment malfunction, but Thaddeus Vale knew better. He wasn't a criminal by birth, nor was he driven by greed. Born in a coal mining town in West Virginia Welch, population 3,000, he'd grown up in a house with no running water and a roof that leaked when it rained. His father died in a mine collapse when Thaddeus was 9. His mother worked double shifts at a diner, her hands cracked from dishwater and cold. By the time he was 16, he taught himself to pick locks, not because he wanted to steal, but because he needed medicine for his younger sister, Lyra, who suffered from seizures doctors said were nervous in origin and expensive to treat. His first break-in was clumsy, a pharmacy at midnight, gloves too big, heart pounding like a war drum. He took only what he needed, phenobarbital, syringes, a bottle of cod liver oil, left a note behind, written in careful script, "I will repay you." TV. No one ever came looking. Over the years, he grew quieter, faster, more precise. He studied architecture, mechanics, airflow patterns, and human behavior. He learned how to move without displacing air, how to step where pressure sensors weren't calibrated, how to exploit blind spots in infrared fields. But his greatest skill, his secret, was not technology. It was timing. Thaddeus didn't walk during heists. He floated. Not literally, of course, but close enough to fool machines, cameras, and instincts alike. Through a combination of controlled breathing, muscle relaxation, and an almost meditative state of balance, he could reduce his physical impact to near zero. He wore custom shoes lined with aerogel foam, lighter than air, insulating, silent. His clothing, tailored from a blend of synthetic fibers used in aerospace gear, absorbed light and muffled sound. He moved in rhythm with the building's natural vibrations, the hum of HVAC systems, the creak of settling beams, so that his presence became part of the background noise. And he never touched the floor. Not directly. Instead, he used a technique he called shadow stepping, placing each foot on the very edge of tiles, where grout met wall, or balancing on the lip of a baseboard, distributing his weight across multiple micropoints. In some cases, he'd enter through ventilation shafts, descending slowly on ropes made of braided Kevlar thread, thin as spider silk, strong as steel. He'd hang suspended above carpets, vaults, marble floors reaching down, with tools shaped like fishing rods to retrieve items without ever grounding himself. To the world, it seemed impossible. To him, it was survival. By early January of 1988, the FBI had assigned Agent Rhoda Keene to the case. A veteran of white-collar crime divisions, she'd transferred from Quantico after solving a series of art thefts in New Orleans using behavioral profiling. She was sharp, skeptical, and immune to sensationalism, but even she paused the first time she watched the grainy bank footage from Fifth Avenue. "There's no one there," she muttered, rewinding the tape for the 7th time. Her partner, Dale Haskins, leaned forward. "Maybe it's a glitch." "No," she said, voice low. "Look at the dust motes. See how they shift right before the vault opens? Something passed through. Something quiet." They began cross-referencing all previous unsolved thefts in the region. 8 in total, dating back to 1984. All shared the same pattern: no entry, no exit, no evidence. And in 6 of them, weather reports mentioned unusually dense fog on the night of the crime. Coincidence? Possibly. But then, on January 15th, 1988, the unthinkable happened again. This time, it was the home of Arthur Pembroke, a retired steel magnate living in a gated estate in Sewickley Heights. The mansion had 20 rooms, a private gallery, and a security system designed by a former CIA contractor. Motion sensors, laser grids, thermal imaging, everything. At 1:43 in the morning, the system registered a temperature fluctuation in the east wing. Not enough to trigger an alert, just a brief dip like a breath against glass. When Pembroke's housekeeper arrived at 7, she found the display case in the study shattered, not broken outward, but inward, as if crushed from within. Missing, a platinum pocket watch engraved with the coordinates of the Titanic's final resting place, and a letter signed by Thomas Edison promising collaboration on a wireless illumination device. Again, no prints, no alarms, no sign of struggle, but this time there was something new. On the marble floor, just beneath the shattered glass, lay a single playing card. The Queen of Spades, flipped face up. Agent Keene stared at it in the evidence photo, her pulse quickening. "He's communicating," she whispered. Haskins frowned. "With whom?" "With us," she said. "Or maybe with someone else." She ordered a full forensic sweep of all prior crime scenes, anything left behind, no matter how insignificant. And 2 days later, in a dusty envelope from the Regal Jewelers case, they found it a matchbook from a diner in Clarksburg, West Virginia. On the back, scribbled in pencil, "For Lyra. Soon." Keen traced the diner's records. Only one person had asked for directions to Welch that week, a man matching Thaddeus Vale's description, paying an exact change, wearing a long coat and sunglasses despite the overcast sky. She flew to West Virginia the next morning. Welch was a ghost of its former self, storefronts boarded up, miners out of work, children playing in empty lots where company houses once stood. She found the Vale residence, easily a sagging frame house on Sycamore Street, paint peeling, porch steps rotted, no lights on, no car in the driveway, but smoke curled from the chimney. She knocked. Silence. Then, the soft click of a lock. The door opened just enough to reveal a woman, thin, pale, wrapped in a wool blanket. Her eyes were red, her hair tied back with a frayed ribbon. "Yes?" she asked, voice hoarse. "Mrs. Vale," Keen said gently. "I'm Special Agent Rhoda Keen, FBI. I'm looking for your son, Thaddeus." The woman didn't flinch, didn't gasp, just exhaled slowly, like someone releasing a burden. "He's not here," she said, "and he won't come back." "Why not?" "Because he's done what he needed to do." Keen stepped forward. "Ma'am, your son is suspected in multiple thefts, over $1 million in losses. People are scared. We need to talk to him." The woman smiled faintly. "Talk to him? You think he'd let you catch him? You think he leaves tracks because he wants to be found?" She opened the door wider. Inside, the room was sparse wood stove, cot, bookshelf, crammed with engineering manuals and old medical journals. On the wall, a map of Pittsburgh was pinned with tiny red dots, each marking a location of a theft. But in the center, a photograph. A young girl, maybe 10 years old, smiling beside a hospital bed. A caption beneath, handwritten, "Lyra's first seizure-free year. She's alive," the woman said softly. "Thanks to him, the medicine, the specialists, the treatments they said we could never afford. He gave her time. 5 years. She passed last April. Peacefully." Keen felt her throat tighten. "And now?" she asked. "Now he's gone," the mother said. "Where? I don't know. Maybe helping someone else. Maybe just resting." She handed Keen a small box wrapped in brown paper. "This came yesterday. No return address. Just your name." Keen opened it. Inside, the Edison letter, the Titanic watch, and a note on thin stationery. "Return these. They were borrowed. T.V." No arrest warrant was ever served, no trial convened. The FBI closed the case in March of 1988, citing insufficient evidence and lack of identifiable suspect. The media moved on. The public forgot. But in quiet corners among locksmiths, security consultants, and urban legends, whispered in police academies, Thaddeus Vale became myth. They say he still moves. On nights when fog rolls in from the rivers, when the wind carries the scent of coal and frost, some claim to see a figure drifting past windows, never casting a shadow, never making a sound. They say he doesn't steal anymore. They say he helps. A wallet returned to a college student who lost it on the T. A stack of bills slipped under the door of a family facing eviction. A prescription filled anonymously at a pharmacy in McKeesport. And sometimes, if you look closely at the snow-covered ground after such events, you'll notice something strange. No footprints. Just the faint impression of edges like someone walked on the very border of the world, never quite landing, never touching, never caught, and perhaps never meant to be.
The stories. This abandoned cabin blueprint exposed a secret crawlspace. The cabin looked ordinary in photos, yet the archived blueprint flagged one space that did not exist on site. Local records listed a one-bedroom layout, but the drawing showed a narrow service void marked beneath the living room. Silas Bergen was 36, and he worked as a county compliance inspector who handled delinquent properties before auction. He drove out on a gray weekday to walk the structure, photograph hazards, and confirm that the layout matched the file. The place sat off a 2-lane road that wound through pines with a creek down behind the lot. The roofline sagged over a porch stripped of rails, and the windows held plastic sheeting taped from the inside. He unlocked the door with a temporary code from asset management, and he called out to clear the space. The air smelled like wet wood and dust, and a fleck of ash drifted when he stepped on a warped plank. His plan was simple: walk clockwise and document each room, then compare notes to the blueprint. He had a body cam that synced to a phone, and he kept a paper checklist clipped to a thin clipboard. The front room matched the drawing in size, yet the joists underneath felt different when he tapped the floor. The sound was dull near the hearth, then strangely hollow near the wall that faced the porch. He paused and studied the print, which carried a date stamp from 1996 and a contractor name. The sheet showed a 6-foot by 3-foot chase for ducting, labeled unfinished, with access from a panel. There was no panel visible, and there were no vents large enough to match the dimensions. He measured along the baseboard with a tape, then marked the chalk line where the void should begin. Silas had done 100 inspections, and he knew when a wall tried to hide something. He set a small level against the trim, then noticed the paint edge looked newer than the room around it. He kept going through the kitchen, where a backed-up sink had left a ring around the basin. A calendar on the wall had pages stuck together, all from 2002, with a fishing cartoon printed on top. He took photos of the wiring, which showed cloth wrap at the outlets, and a modern breaker added later. The breaker ran a separate conduit along the sill, then vanished behind the same living room wall. That mismatch bothered him, so he called the records clerk who had pulled the blueprint the day before. She was retired, but still contracted hourly, and she said the sheet came from a permit request that was never finalized. She added one strange footnote from the parcel folder, which she read out in a careful voice. A handwritten note stated that a neighboring caller reported periodic hammering at night, then sudden silence before daybreak. Silas thanked her, then he checked the porch wall again, and he laid on the floor to sight the baseboard. A thin seam ran under the lowest plank, and a pothook sat in the floor beside the hearth bricks. He tugged the hook, and nothing moved, but the plank next to it shifted slightly when he leaned. He slipped a pry bar under the edge and felt the hidden nail heads give a little under pressure. He stopped and photographed everything, then he made a note to treat the space like a confined area. He lifted the plank a few inches, and the smell from below was cool and mineral, like a cellar after rain. A rectangular cavity dropped 4 feet, then leveled into a crawl space that ran along the living room footprint. The sides were lined with old plywood, and someone had stapled foil-faced insulation in a patchwork grid. He climbed down with gloves, then took a careful crawl on elbows while the body cam light cut the darkness. Dust turned to packed silt, and the foil rustled against his jacket whenever his shoulder grazed the wall. 5 feet in, the crawl space opened into a small wedge where 2 joists had been doubled. A wire ran across the wedge and disappeared through a hole toward the porch, wrapped in black electrical tape. He traced the wire with a finger, then backed out and stepped onto the porch to search for the exit. The wire emerged under the porch bench, fed into a steel box, and terminated at what looked like a switch. The switch was taped into the off position, and the tape had a date written on it, 2005. Next to the switch, a second small box sat empty, with screw marks around a rectangle that once held something. He documented both boxes, then returned to the living room and eased into the void again. The path hooked left and began to slope down, as if someone had carved a shallow ramp under the wall. At the bottom of the ramp, he found a round hole cut cleanly through a concrete footing. The edge had been brushed with some kind of sealant, and faint black scuffs ran along the rim like scrape marks. He slid his phone through the hole and snapped a burst of shots while the flash bounced off damp earth. The images showed a low chamber beyond, supported by sandbags, with a lattice of pallets stacked into a platform. He measured the diameter of the hole with the tape, then radioed his office line to note the confined entry. He did not squeeze through, but he reached his arm further and felt air moving from the chamber. That air smelled like creek water and old leaves, which suggested a connection to the drainage cut behind the lot. He crawled out and circled the property line until he reached the bank where the creek curved north. There, he found a culvert from the road ditch that emptied toward the creek, with riprap hiding several small cavities. One cavity had a plywood face painted to match the stones, and the bottom edge hung loose in the mud. Silas lifted the panel and saw the pallet lattice that matched his phone photos from the interior side. It formed a short tunnel that led back toward the footing hole, shielded from view by the stones and brush. He photographed the culvert from the roadside, then returned to the porch and sat on the step to think. The blueprint had shown a void, and here it was, but the finishing work suggested someone had expanded it well beyond code. Before he called anyone, he walked next door to the only occupied house, a retired welder named Arlen Pike. Arlen was 70, and he looked careful the way men do after years of measuring metal with their eyes. Arlen said the cabin had belonged to a seasonal caretaker who used to plow the track in winter. He remembered hearing light clanking late on some nights, like tools hitting pipe, then a truck idling near the turnout. Silas asked if anyone had lived there after the caretaker left, and Arlen shook his head. He said the place sat empty for years, then one spring, the porch got new paint, and then the power went off again. Arlen added that the road had seen a string of petty thefts around 2005, according to a local newsletter. Coolers, gas cans, and toolboxes disappeared from pickups at the turnout while people hiked the trail. Back inside, Silas opened the kitchen drawer that held mailers, and he found a utility notice dated 2005. The notice warned of irregular off-peak usage with spikes overnight that did not fit seasonal patterns. He called the utility office and asked for the archived meter notes, which a supervisor read while on speaker. The notes recorded low daytime load, then narrow spikes around midnight, and a flag that led to a field check. According to the supervisor, the field tech reported the panel was locked, yet an extra breaker ran to an unknown device. The tech noted a switch near the porch that controlled a separate line, which the owner had taped off. Silas thanked them and returned to the crawlspace, then placed a small magnet near the taped switch. The switch held power after the breaker, so the taped position likely disabled the line that fed the tunnel area. He considered why someone would build a clean conduit between a culvert and a living room. It could be smuggling, or a shady storm shelter, or a quiet way to enter and exit without a porch light turning on. He called the records clerk again and asked if the blueprint contractor had ever filed completion documents. She said the contractor died in 2004 and no one else filed amendments, which left the void uninspected. Silas pulled county incident logs from a public terminal at the office, then filtered for the turnout mile marker. Several entries from 2003 to 2005 mentioned car break-ins during trail hours. One dispatcher note mentioned a caller who thought someone moved under the road's surface near the culvert stones. The caller said the stones rattled like a grate being shifted, then a flashlight beam flickered out toward the creek. Silas visited the small volunteer station where a retired dispatcher still came in to organize training materials. She remembered a prank call trend that year, but she also remembered one credible tip from a hiker who left a name. The hiker, whose name he will not repeat, reported hearing a handheld scanner from inside the culvert during a busy weekend. The voice read license plates quietly, then said clear when a driver left a truck unlocked near the turnout. Back at the cabin, Silas checked the crawl again, and this time he saw faint letters printed on the foil facing. The letters matched a brand of insulated soundboard used in rehearsal rooms to dampen noise without thick walls. He scanned the chamber beyond the footing hole one more time and noticed zip tie heads gleaming along the pallet edges. The ties secured a cable run that likely held a small camera at culvert height aimed at the turnout path. He followed the cable to a break near the pallet mouth where critters had chewed through and left frayed copper. There, he also found a torn plastic sleeve that once held memory cards stuck in the silt beside the beam. Silas collected nothing, but he documented every detail from 4 angles, then filed a report that afternoon. The report asked for a confined space entry team to clear the chamber, then to photograph any equipment left inside. The team scheduled for the next morning, and Silas returned to watch them work while he stood above the crawl. They suited up with masks, slid in carefully, and passed up 4 items, all tagged and bagged for inventory. The items included a small VHF scanner, a smashed action camera, a handwritten log, and a lock with a cut shackle. The log listed dates, truck descriptions, and short notes like cooler, gas can, or tool chest, all marked with times. At the bottom of the log, a few lines mentioned a code word he had heard on the dispatcher note. The writer kept track of the word clear after reading a plate quietly, which matched the hiker account from that season. Silas wrote an addendum that evening that tied the blueprint to the crawlspace and the culvert method. He mapped the route from turnout to pallet chamber, then to the footing hole and the living room lift point. It was crude, yet it was efficient for someone who needed to vanish when headlights turned down the road. A person could slip under the riprap, cut the feed with the switch, stash gear, then rise through the floor and wait out patrols. 2 weeks later, the county closed the chamber with concrete, and asset management stripped the porch to studs. No charges appear in public record related to the log, which suggests the writer was either gone or unidentifiable. Mrballin watched the work from his fence and said it explained the trucks that idled without drivers toward midnight. He said he had chalked it up to fishermen, but the old culvert trick made more sense when joined to the blueprint. Silas requested the utility to send him a copy of their night spike graph for his file notes. The graph showed narrow peaks around midnight, which matched the switch relay cycling, while equipment ran briefly under the floor. Years later, people still hike that turnout, and most know nothing about the pallet chamber under the stones. The cabin has new owners who kept the footprint, yet they asked the county to certify the slab as filled and sealed. The story holds because the file trail fits together and the parts line up with patient logic rather than thrill. A retired dispatcher kept the hand note that matched the log, and a utility supervisor verified the meter pattern. Silas keeps a copy of the 1996 blueprint in a drawer, with the void circled and dated in fresh ink. He says the strangest things in his job are the simplest, like a floor that sounds wrong when you tap it carefully. He never found a name to attach to the log, and there was no need to guess beyond the evidence. It took a thrift store scanner, a pallet stack, and a switch by a porch bench to run a silent route. The blueprint did not expose a treasure, and there was no buried room filled with cash, which makes it credible. It revealed a crawl space that served as a passage, built after a contractor died, and used for quick escapes. If anyone asks why the story stayed quiet, the answer is practical, and it does not involve secrecy or fear. The chamber is sealed, the turnout is patrolled, and the lesson remains written on a sheet that outlived its builder. He still taps floors on inspections and listens for that hollow change that means someone altered a plan. Most houses tell on themselves if you let them, and a blueprint can whisper where a person once chose to hide.
A ghost ship drifted into port with a fresh meal on the stove. It was the winter of 1987 when the fishing trawler Marianne V slipped silently into the harbor of Gloucester, Massachusetts, just before dawn on a brittle February morning. No lights flickered from her deck, no voices called out, no radio signals preceded her arrival. She came like a shadow drifting through fog, her bow nudging gently against Pier 6 as if guided by unseen hands. The first to notice her was Elias Thorne, a weathered dockhand with 40 years of salt in his bones and frost still clinging to the brim of his wool cap. He'd arrived early to check lobster traps, steam rising from his coffee cup curling into the pale gray sky. When he saw the vessel listing slightly, paint peeling like old skin, name barely legible beneath grime, he froze. His breath caught, not from cold, but from instinct. Something was wrong. Deeply wrong. Before we begin, tell me where are you listening from and what time is it there? Elias approached slowly, boots crunching over frozen patches of seaweed and ice. The Marianne V had been reported missing 3 weeks prior, last seen off the Georges Bank during a sudden nor'easter that had swallowed 2 other boats whole. The Coast Guard had called off search efforts after 10 days, assuming all hands lost, and yet here she was, intact, afloat, and strangely, undisturbed. No signs of storm damage, no gaping holes in the hull, nothing overturned on deck, just silence. A thick, suffocating silence that pressed against Elias's ears like cotton. He called out once, twice, no answer. Then, steeling himself, he climbed aboard. The moment his boot touched the deck, he felt it a chill that wasn't from the wind. It coiled up from the wood beneath him, sharp and unnatural, as though the ship itself were holding its breath. He moved toward the wheelhouse. The door hung open, swaying slightly with the motion of the tide. Inside, the radio crackled with static, a faint loop of Morse code repeating endlessly 3 dots, 3 dashes, 3 dots, SOS, over and over, though the power should have been dead. The logbook lay open on the chart table, the last entry dated February 3rd. Heavy fog. Currents erratic. Can't see land. Something in the water. The handwriting grew jagged, frantic, as if written under duress. Elias flipped back a few pages. Earlier entries spoke of routine hauls, calm seas, even jokes about Captain Rourke's terrible stew. But then, around January 28th, the tone shifted. Crew restless. Emery claims he saw lights beneath the surface, not bioluminescence, too steady, too deep. Emery Vale, third mate, quiet man from inland Maine who rarely spoke unless spoken to. He'd joined the crew only 2 months prior, replacing a man who'd quit mid-season, saying the boat felt haunted. Emery hadn't believed in ghosts, or so the others said. But his journal, found later tucked inside a duffel bag below decks, told a different story. Elias descended the narrow metal stairs into the galley, flashlight beam trembling in his grip, and there, on the cast iron stove, sat a pot, still warm. Steam curled lazily from its cracked lid, carrying the scent of onions, potatoes, and something meaty beef, maybe, or pork. A spoon rested against the rim, crusted with congealing gravy. Beside it, a chipped blue mug held tea, long gone cold, but unmistakably brewed that morning. Or the night before, or whenever. Time didn't seem to matter here. He backed away, heart hammering. No one could have boarded without being seen. The harbor was monitored, no small craft had entered after midnight, and yet the meal was fresh. As if someone had stepped away just seconds ago. Then he heard it. A soft clink. From the mess hall, like a fork tapping a plate. He turned slowly. The door stood ajar. Darkness pooled beyond it. He pushed it open with the toe of his boot. Tables bolted to the floor, benches intact, nothing out of place. Except on the farthest table, set for four plates, each with a portion of stew untouched, forks laid neatly beside them, napkins folded, salt and pepper shakers aligned perfectly. And at the head of the table, a fifth plate, empty. But the chair was pulled out, as if someone had just risen. Elias didn't scream, he didn't run, he simply stood there, flashlight shaking, breath coming in short white puffs, until the sound came, again not a clink this time, but a whisper, faint, guttural, from the sleeping quarters below. He didn't go down, not then. He scrambled back onto the pier, shouting for help, voice raw with panic. By the time the Coast Guard arrived, the pot on the stove was cold, the steam had vanished. But the stew remained, uneaten, perfectly preserved, as if time had paused mid-bite. Captain Silas Rourke, grizzled veteran of 30 seasons at sea, was never found. Nor were his 3 crewmen, Emery Vale, Harlan Pike, and Jocelyn Crow, the youngest at 23, who'd signed on to save money for nursing school in Portland. Their personal effects were still in their bunks. Photos of family, letters half-written, toothbrushes damp. But no bodies, no blood, no signs of struggle, just absence. The investigation lasted 6 weeks. Divers scoured the hull, sonar scanned the seabed, forensic teams analyzed the stew, confirmed it contained beef, carrots, and barley, cooked within hours of the ship's arrival. No toxins, no hallucinogens, nothing abnormal. Yet every sailor who boarded the Marianne V afterward reported the same thing. The smell of cooking food, even when the stove was cold, the sensation of being watched from empty rooms, whispers in low, guttural tones, always just beyond hearing. One junior officer, Lyle Mander, claimed he saw Emery Vale standing at the railing at 3:17 in the morning, staring into the fog, mouthing words he couldn't understand. When approached, the figure dissolved like mist. The ship was towed to dry dock, declared unsalvageable not due to structural damage, but because morale among crews plummeted. Men refused to work on her. Mechanics reported tools going missing, only to reappear in locked lockers. Electricians swore lights turned on by themselves, dim and flickering, casting long shadows that moved against the walls. By April, the decision was made. The Marianne V would be scuttled, sunk in deep water beyond the continental shelf, where currents would carry her far from shipping lanes. The ceremony was brief. No flags, no speeches, just a single flare shot into the twilight sky as charges detonated along her keel. She sank slowly, bow first, vanishing beneath the waves with an almost ceremonial grace. But here's what they didn't report, what never made the official logs. 3 days later, a Norwegian freighter, the Fjordwind, radioed the Boston Maritime Authority from 50 miles east of Sable Island. They'd spotted wreckage, part of a wooden table, scorched at the edges, floating amid a slick of oil. Attached to it, miraculously preserved in a sealed plastic sleeve, was a page torn from Emery Vale's journal. The handwriting was frantic, ink smudged as if written in haste or fear. "They're not dead. We never left. The ship doesn't sink. It drifts, it waits, it feeds. The stove is always warm, the table is always set, and one day it will come back. With a fresh meal. For us." The page was authenticated, handwriting matched samples from Emery's personnel file, ink consistent with pens issued to crew, but how it survived explosion, fire, and ocean pressure, no scientist could explain. And then, on the evening of December 9th, 2012, a local fisherman named Corwin Haskins reported seeing a vessel matching the Marianne V's description near Jeffrey's Ledge. Fog was heavy that night, visibility near zero. He claimed the ship passed within 20 feet of his boat, lights dark, decks empty. But from her galley window, a yellow glow pulsed like a stove lit below. He tried hailing her, no response. When he turned to grab his radio, she was gone. Vanished into the mist. No wreckage was found, no trace on radar. The Coast Guard dismissed it as a mirage, a trick of the light. But Corwin insisted, said he smelled stew in the air, beef, carrots, barley, and underneath something darker, metallic, like blood. To this day, Gloucester fishermen avoid that stretch of water after sunset, especially in winter, especially when the fog rolls in thick and silent. Some say if you listen closely on still nights, you can hear the Morse code 3 dots, 3 dashes, 3 dots echoing from beneath the waves. Others claim to see a faint glow beneath the surface, drifting with the current like a lantern in the deep. And every year, around February 10th, a single bouquet of wilted wildflowers appears on the railing of Pier 6. No note, no signature. Just flowers brown at the edges, salt stiffened, as if carried across the sea. Left there, some say, by someone who never came home. But perhaps the most unsettling detail, the one that lingers in the mind long after the story ends, is this. When authorities finally cleaned out the galley before scuttling the ship, they found something odd in the cupboard. A can of stew. Store-bought, label faded, best before date, October 12th, 1986. Expired over a year earlier, yet the can was warm to the touch. And when opened, it was full. Steaming. Fresh. As if just heated. No one ate it. It was incinerated along with the rest. But sometimes, late at night, when the wind howls just right through the rigging of moored boats, people swear they can smell it, that rich, savory aroma. Onions, potatoes, meat slow-cooked for hours. And they wonder, who was it meant for? And more importantly, is the table still set? The sea keeps its secrets well, but every now and then, it returns them to drift into port, unannounced, uninvited, with a fresh meal on the stove and chairs waiting to be filled. So the next time you walk past an empty dock and the wind carries the faint scent of cooking food, ask yourself, was that the neighbor's dinner? Or something else? Something older? Something hungrier? Something that remembers your name and knows when you'll be home? Divers opened the hatch, the crew was gone, the clocks still ticking. The cold Atlantic wind howled across the surface of the water, slicing through the pre-dawn darkness like a blade. Waves rose and fell in uneven rhythm, their crests flecked with foam under a sky still clinging to stars. It was early morning, just past 4 o'clock, on the 7th day of March in the year 1987, the U.S. Coast Guard cutter Vigilant had been dispatched from Port Canaveral after an automated distress signal flickered to life from the coordinates of the Stella, a private research vessel registered out of Norfolk, Virginia. No voice transmission followed, only the repeating pulse of a Mayday beacon, weak but persistent, like a heartbeat fading beneath ice. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from, and what time is it there? By the time the boarding team reached the hull of the Stella, the sea had grown restless. Lieutenant Thaddeus Vale, a seasoned maritime investigator with the Coast Guard Search and Rescue Division, stood at the edge of the deck, gripping the rail as the swell lifted the cutter sideways. His breath came in short clouds, his eyes scanning the silent silhouette ahead, There were no lights aboard, no movement. Just the creak of metal and the groan of stressed rivets echoing from within the darkened superstructure. "Something's wrong," muttered Petty Officer Lorne Kestrel, adjusting his helmet cam. He was younger, sharp-eyed, with a nervous energy that flared whenever silence stretched too long. No response to radio hails. No crew on deck. Not even a flare. Thaddeus didn't answer. He stepped forward, boots clanging against the gangplank as it settled onto the research vessel's main deck. The air smelled of salt, yes, but underneath, something sharper. Metallic, like old wiring or scorched insulation. He paused, hand resting on the hatch handle. It was warm, not from the sun hadn't risen yet, but from within. Heat radiated faintly through the steel, unnatural for a ship adrift in 38-degree Fahrenheit waters. He glanced back once. The rest of the team waited behind him, Kestrel, Ensign Marin Voss, and Medic Darren Cope. All wore full gear, thermal suits, respirators, sidearms. Protocol dictated caution when vessels went silent. But this wasn't just silent, this was absent, as if the world had exhaled and the Maristella had been forgotten in the breath. With a slow turn, Thaddeus pulled the hatch open. A rush of stale, overheated air poured out thick with the scent of ozone and something vaguely sweet, like burnt sugar. The corridor beyond was dimly lit by emergency strips along the floor, casting long shadows up the walls. Panels hung loose from the ceiling, wires dangling like roots torn from soil. And then, there it was. The sound. Faint, rhythmic, almost musical. Clocks. Dozens of them. Hundreds. Mounted on bulkheads, bolted to consoles, taped to lockers, analog dials spinning, second hands ticking in erratic unison. Some moved forward, others backward. A few stuttered, frozen between seconds. Digital displays blinked in red, dates flashing nonsensically. January 3rd, 2005. July 9th, 1999. November 1st, 1973. None matched the current date, none made sense. But the crew gone, no bodies, no signs of struggle, no blood, no personal effects scattered. Everything was in place. Coffee cups half filled, logbooks open mid-sentence, jackets hanging neatly on hooks. A thermos sat on the galley table, still warm. Beside it, a pair of gloves' fingers curled as if recently removed. And yet, no one. Ensign Voss knelt beside a wall panel, her gloved fingers brushing over a cluster of clocks wired together with copper thread. "These aren't standard issue," she said, voice tight. "They're not even from the same manufacturer. Some look homemade." Darren Cope moved toward the sleeping quarters, door ajar, bunks made, pillows flattened, as though someone had just risen. He checked the head, the mess hall, the engine room, all empty. "It's like they vanished," he whispered. "Just stepped out of their lives." Thaddeus walked deeper into the vessel, drawn toward the central lab. That's where the heat intensified. The door was sealed shut, reinforced with a manual latch on the outside. He hesitated. Then, with a grunt, he turned the wheel and pushed. Inside, the temperature climbed near 110 degrees. Rows of monitors lined the far wall, all dark except one, a single screen glowing with shifting waveforms, pulsing in time with the ticking from the hallway. In the center of the room stood a cylindrical chamber, roughly 6 feet tall, constructed of polished steel and glass. It hummed softly, a low frequency vibrating through the floor. Wires snaked from its base into a junction box labeled Temporal Feedback Array. Do not disconnect. Thaddeus approached slowly. On the console beside the chamber, a logbook lay open. The last entry read, March 6th, 1987, final test initiated at 2200 hours. Field stabilized at 0.87 terahertz. Temporal resonance achieved. Crew reporting mild disorientation. Clock drift noted in adjacent sectors. Proceeding to Phase 3 despite protocol concerns. Dr. Corwin Hale insists integrity holds. If this works, we may witness causality inversion. God help us if we don't return. Below it, scrawled in different ink, shaky and urgent, we weren't supposed to see it. We weren't supposed to remember. The clock doesn't move forward, it chooses. It chose to erase us. Don't open the chamber, don't listen to the ticks. They're not counting time, they're counting down to when you forget too. Thaddeus stared at the page. His throat tightened. Behind him, Kestrel entered, breathing hard. "Lieutenant, you need to see this." He led Thaddeus back to the bridge. The navigation system was offline, but the backup chronometer, factory sealed, never tampered with, was spinning wildly. Not just the second hand, the entire mechanism, hour, minute, second revolving in reverse. And then, abruptly, stopping. It read, 4:17 a.m., March 7th, 1987. Exactly the time they had arrived. "No," Thaddeus breathed. "That's impossible." Kestrel pointed to the radar scope. Empty. No other vessels within 50 nautical miles, no aircraft, nothing. Yet on the communications board, the tape recorder was running. They rewound it, pressed play. Static. Then a voice, calm, familiar. It was Thaddeus's own. "This is Lieutenant Thaddeus Vale. We've boarded the Maristella at approximately 4:17 a. M crew is missing, systems compromised. Recommend immediate quarantine and retrieval. Do not approach the central chamber. Repeat, do not open it." The recording ended. Silence fell like a weight. Marin Voss looked up, face pale. That was just recorded. We haven't reported anything yet." Thaddeus turned toward the lab. The humming had changed, grown louder, more insistent. The single monitor now displayed a new message, scrolling in crisp white text. "Initiation sequence repeated. Observers registered. Temporal loop confirmed." And below it, "Previous attempt failed. This cycle must succeed." Darren backed away, shaking his head. "We weren't the first ones here, were we?" Thaddeus didn't answer. He remembered the thermos, the gloves, the warmth. Someone had been here moments before, or someone would be, and they'd left clues, warnings, for themselves. Because if time wasn't linear, if the past and future could bleed into the present, then perhaps they weren't rescuers. Perhaps they were echoes. Back in the lab, the chamber began to vibrate. A thin crack appeared in the glass. From within, a shadow shifted. Not human, not quite, but familiar. As if seen in a dream, or remembered from a photograph taken years ago. And then the clock stopped. Every single one. The silence was deafening. For 3 heartbeats, nothing moved. Then, simultaneously, they restarted. But this time, they all showed the same time. 4:13 a.m., March 7th, 1987. 4 minutes earlier. Thaddeus felt it then, a pressure behind his eyes, a tingling in his fingertips. A memory surged, unbidden. Standing on this very deck, gripping the hatch, hearing Kestrel say, "Something's wrong," as if for the first time, only he hadn't remembered that before. Or had he? He turned to the others. Their faces were blank, confused, as if waking from sleep. "What? What are we doing here?" Marin asked, blinking rapidly. "We just arrived," Kestrel said, stepping forward. No response to radio hails, no crew on deck, not even a flare. Thaddeus froze. He had heard this before. He had lived this before. And in that moment, he understood. They weren't breaking into the loop. They were trapped inside it. The Maristella wasn't abandoned. It was waiting for them to make the same mistake again. And somewhere, deep in the bowels of the ship, the chamber pulsed once, like a heart remembering how to beat. Months later, the official report listed the Maristella as lost at sea, presumed sunk during a sudden storm front. All hands missing, presumed dead, the case was closed, files archived, survivors, none. Evidence, scant. Just a few corrupted audio logs, a set of mismatched timestamps, and one handwritten note found in Thaddeus Vale's personal effects delivered to his sister's home in Asheville, North Carolina, with no return address, postmarked June 11th, 1987. The note read simply, "I remember the clocks. I remember the heat. I remember saying the same words, seeing the same faces. I don't know how many times I've lived this. But I know one thing, if you're reading this, I failed again. And you're next. Listen carefully. When you hear the ticking, don't follow it. Don't open the hatch. And whatever you do, don't trust the time on your watch." The letter was dated March 7th, 1987. But the postmark was from March 7th, 2024. And in a small attic drawer in Asheville, buried beneath old photographs and yellowed letters, a single analog clock sits untouched. Its hands have not moved in 37 years. Yet every night, at exactly 4:17 a.m., it ticks once, as if reminding someone, as if calling them back.